So how many of you have done this dance before? You're doing all the right things, you're exercising, you're maintaining a deficit, and the scale's not moving, you're looking the same, and then all of a sudden, whoosh. One morning you wake up like 5 days later, a week later, 2 weeks later, pounds are down, you look a lot leaner, and you're like, I don't understand. I thought I was doing all the right things. I thought that fat loss was supposed to occur kind of gradually over time, not in this weird, pulsatile, almost iterative fashion. Well, this is what we refer to colloquially as the whoosh effect. Now, I have to tell you that the following theory that I'm going to describe in this video is currently just that. It's a theory, but it's a very solid, very sound working theory that seems to play out as described in anecdote. So, first and foremost, we need to kind of talk about the nature of adipose tissue, of fat cells. Unlike muscle cells, where we don't know if we can make more muscle cells or muscle hyperplasia in humans just yet, fat cells both grow in size and in number. So they hypertrophy, so to make bigger, right? Hypertrophy isn't just a muscle thing. The word literally just means to make bigger, so it's contextual. And then hyperplasia, or the expansion of, or the multiplication rather, of additional tissues. Fat cells do both. It is an unfortunate artifact of our kind of baked-in anti-starvation survival mechanism that we kind of don't want as 2024 humans. But the fact that we can both get larger and multiply our fat cells so easily means that we can also shrink and eliminate them just as easily if we do all the right things consistently. Part of the problem with being 2024 humans and applying a caloric deficit and exercising is that our physiology, our base biology, doesn't understand that we aren't in kind of like a critical potential starvation scenario. So even though thermodynamics is what it is, and ultimately the deficit and the exercise, if consistently applied, will win, there are still some kind of like backup anti-starvation systems in place, and this is what we see here. So the current working theory of the whoosh effect is that essentially you're in your deficit, you're training, right? The fat cell, in terms of the actual adipose tissue, the 9 calories per gram fat itself is shrinking. The lipid portion is being broken down and utilized for energy. However, the cell volume is being refilled with water. So we know, for instance, when we replenish glycogen after our workouts with a meal, for every gram of carb that comes in, we have another 3 grams of water that tend to come in with that carb. Some of that water is refilling the fat cell, maintaining its volume. Then ultimately, when the lipid content of the cell is used up, and there's, the framework of a membrane with just a bunch of water in it, the fat cell ultimately collapses. That water goes elsewhere for other processes or is excreted or however. And so you lose that increment of fat and water from your body. Multiply that times, many thousands of cells, and you get the equivalent of visual leanness, and not to mention a few pounds down on the scale. This is a perfect example of how working things out on paper isn't exactly how it's going to play out in real life. Like the above infographic here, just for example, demonstrates a 5-pound whoosh effect after a 2-week period. But depending on how aggressively you're pulling the diet and exercise levers, this could be after 3 days, it could be after 2 weeks, it could be after 2 months. Fat loss isn't linear, it's more phasic, and it's never a single factor thing. A lot of the calories in, calories out zealots aren't wrong. they're just less right than they think they are, because it's not a simple matter of doing the math on paper and then the weight just comes off, because there are other factors that are involved in that besides just energy balance, you know. Ultimately, energy balance is the final arbiter. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but in terms of the whoosh effect, other factors can determine your water retention. They can determine how much calories are being used from your lipid stores versus stored glycogen versus, you know, let's say you just have a really aggressive calorie deficit from food, but you aren't training. You know, you're not necessarily going to pull all of your calories from fat. You're going to lose some lean mass too. So again, there's a lot of nuance to fat loss. It's not just as simple as calories in, calories out. And those nuances are played out in things like the whoosh effect that if you've been dieting for quite some time, you'll see for yourself. This is why, as a coach, it's far easier to make accurate predictions as to what point your clients, your athletes, are going to hit certain body weights or rough percentages of body fat if you make the diet long and gradual. So in my call for fire method for weight loss, I explained that generally speaking, I try not to go more aggressively than 1%, not pound, percent of an individual's body weight per week, or even 0.5%. And the reason being is because when you track your weight, or well, your weight loss rather, I should say, by percentages, it scales to the individual. Because a larger person, 1% a week, is going to be a much larger integer value than a smaller person. This isn't necessarily the best language to use to explain this concept, but ultimately where I'm going here, folks, is that, you know, the whoosh effect is an anti-starvation mechanism. So in order to allow your biology to be more amenable to fat loss, so not losing lean tissue but just the fat, if you're too aggressive, if you make your body too uncomfortable, it's going to try to do everything to retain the fat, whether it's keep those cells filled with water until the last minute or just take the calories from something else, unless you tell it with absolute certainty with resistance training, you know, or other means that no, we're hanging on to lean tissue and we're just losing fat. You got to make your body uncomfortable to lose fat, but at the same time comfortable enough to be amenable to lose fat, if that makes sense. And that is where submaximal training comes in, programming, sleep quality, good nutrition, etc., etc. So that's it, folks. The whoosh effect in a nutshell. Again, this is just a working theory, but I do believe that this is something like how it actually works because I've observed it many times in my 28 years of doing this. All the more reason, folks, to not get discouraged when you don't see that scale move, because consistency is a superpower. So stick to the plan and stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.